So, let's try that again. How about now? Can you hear me now? Because I've been talking for 5 minutes and nobody's been able to hear a thing I could say because I had the output muted. Can you hear me now? Okay. Let's try that again. So that's gonna be super awesome. Good thing there's nobody here. Can you hear me now? How about now? Says there's 3 people viewing. Question is, can anybody hear me? That is so weird. It shouldn't be louder than I am because the microphone is turned up. So there, turned up the gain a little bit. Can you hear me now? Okay. I had the gain turned down really low on my preamp thing. Otherwise, it picks up every single noise in the universe. So, we're 10 minutes in and nobody could hear me until just now. We're off to a glorious start. So, let me start all over again with all of the fun things and yeah, that's just how it goes sometimes. But it's okay because we're learning and we won't make the same mistake twice. And if we do, then you can pick on me for them. So, book. I am Randy and I write under the pen name Miranda K. Darq, and this is my first time using Streamlabs, and it is obvious that I am a noob, but it is fine. So, this book is the first full-length novel I have written in a long time, much less published in a long time. And this book was intended to be the first in a trilogy. But now it's probably more like the first of 6 or 7 books. We'll see how that shakes out once I start writing the second one, because I got to where the plot ends in this one and realized I was only about halfway through what I had planned out in my outline, and if I were to put all of that in one book, it would have been like 600 pages, 700 pages. And this is not epic fantasy, so it shouldn't be like that. But anyway, so, Blood from Stone, first book. You can see the cover there, so I don't need to keep trying to show you the cover because you can see it. But this book is a lot of things. It is triumph over being told that I wasn't good at writing and shouldn't write, and whether people enjoy it or not, that's all subjective, so to each their own. But I'm going to read the blurb description thingy on the back, and it honestly needs some work because it's kind of dry. But joys of being self-published is that I can adjust all of that fun stuff at any point whenever the heck I want to, and revise things whenever the heck I want to. So I will definitely do that. With 7 unbeating hearts, Liliana Gunstein's destiny prowls within these walls. Lily is a warrior, or so she thinks. Upon meeting the very vampire she's meant to protect and feed, an allergy flips her destiny on its head. Life at the Winterbourne estate is nothing like she expected. The dangerous allure of these 7 gorgeous men tugs at her heart and the darker urges dwelling within her body. Can Liliana handle loving 7 hungry Can she handle loving 7 hungry bloodsuckers? Apparently I cannot say that 5 times fast. How will they protect her from the insatiable press and the interest of the other vampire clans? Blood from Stone is the first book in the Song of the Sangomar series. It is a reverse harem story with plenty of heat, a non-binary pyrokinetic vampire, and heroes with hard bodies and soft hearts. So this is a paranormal romance reverse harem story with some horror elements. A little bit, not too terribly much. I could have been much more heavy-handed, and probably honestly will be in the second book, because this was all kind of setting things up only to tear them down, so to speak, without giving too many awful spoilers. So, I am going to read the first chapter. And the dedication, which is not the same as the acknowledgements page, says, "For anyone who hasn't found their place in the world, may you discover your home in the people who love you." You're going to get some page flip ASMR going on here too. Joys of a physical book. And remember, physical copies, while they are more expensive than digital, are better long term if it's something you really enjoy, because you never know when Amazon is going to decide that they just don't want you to have access to that book anymore. Alright, let's see. I remember this chapter being quite long. Oh yes, this chapter is quite long. Shame on me. It's going to intimidate people. It's like 12 pages long. Okay. So we're gonna sit up and scoot over so we're facing the microphone a bit better. Gotta front like I'm a professional, you know. Chapter 1. Having been unceremoniously dumped at the curb with her luggage and no signs of a welcome party, Liliana huffed out an exasperated sigh. It rose in a cloud before her face in the cool evening air. She glared up at the majestic architecture that loomed ominously in the encroaching darkness, the estate's spires and numerous buildings shouting a warning to the woman as the sun plummeted below the horizon. She'd have thought the grounds were beautiful under any other circumstance. And we have got the webcam tripping out, don't we? Don't know why it does that. Doesn't make any sense why it does that. There we go. All the things that can go wrong will go wrong. Murphy's Law. Joys of being Irish. Moving on. She slung her backpack over her shoulder and grabbed the handle to her suitcase, rolling it along behind her and heading inside. The chill of New York's autumn charged in as the sunlight was swallowed by the bowl of stars. The weather was getting too frosty to wait outside until someone came to fetch her. With 7 unbeating hearts, Liliana Gunstein's destiny prowled within these walls. She wandered the halls hoping to find someone, or something, to guide her to the main building. But this was a home, not a tourist attraction. There was no map to show her the way, and she hadn't seen a single sign of life since the door shut behind her. The variety of random indoor greenery she came across didn't count. Liliana masqueraded as a patient person, and as the minutes continued to roll over, she felt her fuse burning dangerously closer to the powder keg. Grumbling under her breath, she finally came across a place to sit. The mansion must have heard her tired feet screaming for respite. The buttery, slick brown leather ottoman beckoned her with its siren song, and she sank gratefully onto it. Her backpack dropped onto the floor with a thud that echoed through the empty hallway. Slumping backwards, she let her head rest against the cool stone of the wall behind her, and her eyes slid shut. Despite her outward calm, there was a war going on inside Liliana's head. The infinitely patient half, from the years of training she'd undergone, and the natural part of her psyche that goaded her to physically combat anything else she encountered. Who the hell did the Winterborns think they were? Her whole life had been dedicated to the idea of being theirs once she came of age, and not a single damned one of them had shown up to welcome her to this unfamiliar place. Rage simmering, she decided to search a bit longer before just returning to this spot and sleeping there for the night. She had shelter, she had food in her belly, and her bags. Those things, combined with the unimaginably comfortable spot she sat, were more than sufficient for her to get some rest. Her fingers traced the raised stitches on the bench beneath her, somehow managing to be both rough and supple all at once. In a near meditative state, Liliana could hear voices. She stopped absorbing the number of stitches with her fingertips and listened, keeping her eyes closed. None of the words were clear to her from this distance, but she felt she could zero in on their origin without too much trouble. Deep gray eyes shot open as she heard the unmistakable, hollow thud of fists descending on flesh and the accompanying crash of a body being thrown to the floor. Adrenaline roaring through her veins, Liliana Gunstein was on her feet and running toward the noise of battle, her bags forgotten. After being left to fend for herself in the maze of hallways, she was ready to kick someone's ass. This was the perfect opportunity to strike while the iron of her rage glowed vermilion. She ran down the hallway, her sensible heels buckled on and not slowing her down. She came to a set of double doors that were ajar and slammed into the bar, shoving the door wide. She stumbled into what looked like a gymnasium, her shoes squeaking on the waxed hardwood floor. This part of the building reminded her of the high school she'd gone to. Industrial box-standard doors and all. The entire room was cast in heavy shadows, barely lit beyond utter darkness by the moon that filtered through the skylights in the high ceiling. Drink break. She could make out the shapes of two men on the ground, grappling and pummeling each other mercilessly. The relentless dull thud of flesh hammered against flesh compelled her to act. Hey, read that again. The relentless dull thud of flesh hammering against flesh, compelling her to act. Love how we just make things up in our brain when it's right in front of us. Isn't that the best? It's the best. Dashing to where they fought, she shouted to get their attention. Hey! The shadows froze, the sudden cloak of silence that descended on the large room speeding Liliana's already racing pulse. They didn't move, didn't breathe. It was eerie, unnerving. Every alarm bell in her head rang, and she took a hesitant step backwards as the men got to their feet. They were tall, easily a head taller than she was, and the breadth of their shoulders made her wish she had anything at hand to defend herself with. They were unarmed and clad in nothing more than athletic shorts, but she still felt outgunned. Realizing the men had been sparring rather than fighting, she felt like a fool. How the hell would I have pried apart two grown men who were trying to kill each other anyway? Idiot. Liliana cursed herself mentally, taking another step back as they advanced on her with a distinctly predatory slowness that was maddening. They both stood still, their faces obscured by shadows. Seconds ticked by like hours, and there was a soft sound that she almost didn't hear. One of them was sniffing, scenting the air, smelling her. My. Ryan, what day is today? The one nearer to her spoke first. Friday. Oberon, why? The second man's voice was strangely similar to the first's. Their names were familiar, but her brain had gone into survival mode. Taking advantage of their bickering, Liliana turned on her heel, preparing to run back out the doors and to the familiar safety of the weapons stored in her luggage. An involuntary squeak escaped her lips as one of the men appeared before her with unnatural speed, effectively blocking her only avenue of escape. Spinning back in the other direction, she slammed into a wall of flesh that was unexpectedly warm. When the hell did vampires start generating their own body heat? And you said I was the slow one, idiot. Don't you remember that we're supposed to be receiving our Sangomar today? Sinewy arms wrapped around her, caging her body as the second man moved in close enough that Liliana was effectively sandwiched between them. Any other woman nearing her 30th birthday would have paid for this experience, but Lily found herself wishing she'd grabbed her knives. A low rumbling chuckle caressed her ear from behind, and rough fingertips traced a teasing trail down the side of her throat, sending a shudder through her whole body. Her anxiety level reduced from a 10 to a 9 from that simple show of compassion, but she was still so full of adrenaline that someone could have peeled her off the ceiling. Way to not waste time turning on that smut charm of yours, Orion. The vampire holding her hostage scoffed at the other. He must have been Oberon. Now, little brother. No need to be jealous. And besides, you know too much cortisol taints the blood. Best to make them calm. Keep them happy. These were some of the Winterborn she'd been searching for. This wasn't how she'd expected their first meeting to go. And she hadn't been given any formal training on how to conduct herself when she did encounter the men she'd been destined to serve since her birth. Feeling she should at least introduce herself, she opened her mouth to speak. Oberon cut her off before she had the chance, lifting her off her feet like she weighed nothing. Welcome home, Liliana. They struck at the same time, twin sets of fangs piercing her flesh with such sudden ferocity that it was all she could do not to scream. Not from pleasure, but from searing agony that set her nerves on fire and crushed salt into the raised and barren remains. Her vision went white, spots dancing before her eyes as they greedily fed from the fount of her veins. She bit down on her lip, doing her damnedest not to let loose a single whimper. Liliana was raised to be a warrior, to defend herself from any who might try to take her away from the very vampire she was meant to be a Sangomar for. How could she manage that if the mere act of being bitten had her wanting to curl up in the corner and weep? The intense pain that bolted through her was the opposite of what her father's musty old tomes spoke about. A vampire's bite was supposed to bring immense pleasure unlike anything most mortals tasted in the whole of their lifetime. She closed her eyes, every muscle in her body taut as a fiddle string as she tried to meditate her way past the all-consuming torture that racked her body. Even the sensation of their tongues sliding against her throat did nothing for her, not even enough of a distraction to say so. Oberon's grip on her shifted, and her hands were now free. She wrapped her fingers around his forearms, trembling with the effort not to dig her nails into his flesh and flee the scene when he dropped her. Her sense of duty warred with her survival instinct, ultimately coming to an impasse that let her wrap her legs around his waist. She was trying to hold herself up, but tempted to crush him with the strength in her thighs. Orion's hand gently framed her face, the pad of his thumb tracing across her cheek. Oberon released the wound on her neck to chase a small rivulet of blood that ran down her chest, catching it with a curl of his tongue directly over her heart. Orion stopped drinking at the same moment. Oberon, something's wrong. Orion's voice was husky and raw. Her nerve endings felt the same. The man in question cradled her body more fully, his hand pressed to the center of her back, suddenly becoming gentler as he felt the tension singing through her frame. Damn. You're right. I thought she was just being quiet. Let's get her into the light. Liliana couldn't even speak. She felt like a puppet as Oberon whisked her from the gymnasium and into the hallway. Dim lights illuminated the space, and she could truly see them for the first time. Everything that had been pounded into her since early childhood wanted her to enjoy what she saw. She should consider herself lucky to be indentured to identical twins with blonde hair, blue eyes, and the sort of physiques that human men couldn't attain without devoting their life to the gym. Logic didn't give a damn about how pretty they were, though. They'd hurt her, whether they intended to or not. The world tilted crazily as they moved down the hall to her luggage. The weapons in her suitcase practically screamed for her, but she couldn't even move. She longed for the familiar feel of their hilts in her hands, to soothe away this horrifying and sudden shock at what felt like nothing less than the loss of her innocence. Oberon set her down gingerly on the very same bench she'd sat on when she first arrived. All snark was gone from his tone as he knelt before her. Cornflower blue eyes met hers, the depth of grief in them like a stab to her heart. You are Liliana, right? Tears poured silently down her face, an involuntary reaction she was ashamed of. She clenched her hand into a fist, still unable to find her words. She managed a single nod. He looked over his shoulder to his brother. How the fuck can a Sangomar feel pain from our bite? Orion shrugged. Hell if I know. I'm not the scholar. Maybe we should ask Leon. Oberon nodded. We'll do that later. For now, let's get her to her room. Get her something to eat. He stood to his full height, towering over her from her seated position, and held his hand out to her. Can you stand? I know a little about your training, and I don't want to wound your pride by carrying you around like a fashion accessory. Liliana replied with a sound that was a sob and laughter interwoven together. She placed her hand in his, and warm fingers closed around hers, helping her easily to her feet. Her legs wobbled, but she threw a hand out and caught herself on the stone wall beside the bench. Normal sensation was beginning to return to her body, her vision no longer hazy and filled with spots. Off-kilter as she felt, at least she was recovering quickly. I'll grab her bags, Orion said, letting Oberon lead the way. Still has her luggage and everything. Where the fuck is Maverick? He was supposed to show her around and take her to her room. His words ended with an inhuman snarl, the murderous gleam in his eye a screaming predator. The brothers talked back and forth, but it remained largely static to her as she focused on her legs not becoming pools of half-formed gelatin. Liliana leaned on Oberon's arm when she needed to, but mostly tried to carry her weight on her own. She felt like she was trying to work poison out of her body. The extra movement would either heal her quicker or drive it to her heart and kill her faster. She wasn't sure which scenario she'd prefer at this point. After walking for what felt like hours and ending up in a different building entirely, the twins showed her to the room that would be hers for the rest of her life. Sweet was a more accurate depiction. Sweet was a more accurate description. There was a decent-sized living area with a separate bedroom, attached bathroom, and a kitchenette. Liliana was confused. This wasn't the servants' quarters she'd been prepared for. Her belongings were meager, regardless, but this room had space for 3 to live comfortably. And the king-size bed was no joke, either. Feeling strong enough to finally stand unassisted, she stepped away from him and lightly ran her fingers over the heavy black duvet. She cast her gaze around the space that made most single apartments seem small by comparison. "This is mine?" Her voice came out small, breathy. Orion took a seat on the plush armchair right beside the bed. "It is. We tried to decorate to your taste, but your father didn't give us much information. So if there's anything not to your liking, we'll get it changed ASAP. Furniture, paint on the walls, carpets, anything." "Why?" The twins exchanged confused glances. "Because modern vampires don't treat their Sangamars like slaves? We have a more symbiotic relationship. Happy Sangamar, happy us, right?" Liliana murmured her assent. "Let me guess. Your father had the dusty old European grimoires about vampires, didn't he? The ones with the cool old hand-drawn engravings." Oberon sat on the edge of the bed and she sank down beside him with a nod. "I used to loved tracing them when I was young." She stuttered horribly, but finally managed to force her lips and tongue to form words. "You've got a lot of antiquated shit to scrub from your brain then. Except for Aubrey, none of us are too far past 100, so we don't operate like that." Orion rose, bare feet padding across the carpeted floor to the fridge against the far wall in the living space. He returned with a large glass of orange juice and a bowl of strawberries so ripe they looked like they'd burst if she touched them. She arched a questioning brow at him and he laughed, sitting on the other side of her. "If this is the part where you tried to feed me from your hand like a pet, I might bite off a finger. Consider yourself warned." Her voice was gravelly and hoarse, like she'd been screaming for hours, but at least she could form a complete sentence. Both men howled with laughter, Orion handing the glass to her before his chortling could accidentally spill the liquid all over the bed. She chugged it, not giving a damn about table manners. And they weren't at the table anyway. That's more of the attitude we were expecting. The juice and fruit will give you a quick hit of sugar to wake you up and help your iron levels. Hope you really love spinach or you're gonna have a rough time. Liliana snatched the bowl of strawberries away from Orion, stating with pride, "I just so happen to be able to eat it raw, by the handful." She took a bite of one of the deep red berries, the juice bursting in her mouth as her teeth cut effortlessly through its flesh. Oberon chuckled. He figured you'd prefer something light over liver. She shrugged, mumbling around the mouthful of fruit. "This is a lot quicker, so it'll do for now." The twins sat silently as she devoured the strawberries, having a conversation over her head and in theirs. Not only did she get dropped off at the wrong goddamn building, but she's clueless as to how things really work. And what the fuck are we gonna do about causing excruciating pain anytime we need to feed? Oberon's thoughts echoed in his brother's mind, consternation creasing his brow. Orion sighed aloud. "If we need, we can always find someone else to feed on until we get it figured out. Bonding with a Sangamar is supposed to be borderline sacred. We don't want the girl to get worn down by fighting that level of pain multiple times a day. It'd kill her inside of a few months, if she even lasted that long." Liliana stared at the two of them, her eyes flicking back and forth between them before narrowing. "Are you having a mental conversation right now?" "Literally over my head. With me sitting right between you?" The twins shrugged sheepishly in sync with each other. "Is that a Vampire thing or a twin thing? A little of both, they said in unison, laughing together. Liliana couldn't help but join in. She'd been taught to work through pain, moving past it with more ease than most. When it was physical, at least. She wasn't ready to forget, but she was willing to forgive the twins. It didn't hurt that their good mood was infectious. Oberon glanced at the clock on her nightstand. It's almost midnight now. You should get some rest. My tiredness can be ignored. Aren't you lot up all night long? We are. It'll take you a few days to adjust to our schedule, though. You know we don't need to sleep more than an hour or two. Her brow furrowed and her chewing slowed. What do you mean? You don't need protection by day while you're asleep and dead to the world? Two sets of blue eyes shared a glance of concern. We've got a lot of misinformation you'll need to unlearn, apparently. But we can start on that in the morning. Over breakfast. In the sunshine. With the rest of our brothers. No one had to tell her twice. I'll unpack and rack out then. Liliana got to her feet, wobbling unsteadily for a second before catching her balance. Rack out? You sound like you were raised in a militia. She paused on the path to her bags, tilting her head in wonderment. Studying their expressions silently, she finally barked a laugh. You didn't know that I was? Raised by a militia, I mean. How else do you think vampire guardians are made? Orion whistled. Wow. Alrighty then. Apparently there's a lot of crossed wires from both sides of the comm lines. Get some sleep. We'll catch you in the morning. Do you take your coffee black too? Oberon asked, still overcome with disbelief. She snorted. Do I look like a barbarian to you? No way. The three of them laughed and the men bid her good night, leaving her to her own devices. Once everything was unpacked and in its proper place, she dressed down for bed and crawled under the heavy covers. Running the pads of her fingers over the tender, throbbing, barely scabbed over wounds on her throat, Liliana let her vision settle on the ceiling and the darkness. Nothing was going as planned, and she was too exhausted to care. And that is the end of chapter 1. With all the flubs and mess-ups in reading it and all of the technical difficulties beforehand, but oh my god, I survived. And I made it through. So, for anybody who is present, I hope that you're enjoying things and can still hear me okay. Let's see what we got here. That is so weird. Everything is just showing up strangely in like 5 different tabs. YouTube and Streamlabs don't seem to... One hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing, and that's okay. So it is 4:42 right now. Let's see. Definitely don't have time to read a whole other chapter because I believe chapter 2 is also pretty lengthy, if I recall correctly. Had a lot going on in the first couple of chapters. You know, you gotta set the scene and really hammer home just how incorrect everything that she'd been taught was. Man, chapter 3 is super short. Chapter 2 is still pretty long, so yeah, we won't do another chapter. So, if anybody here is interested in the book, it is now up for sale on Amazon. It is available digitally, and it is in the Kindle Unlimited program. the Kindle Unlimited thing, I'm only going to have it run for the first 90 days, and then we'll see where we're at, and then potentially take it wide, maybe keep it in KU, we'll see. But I will be working on getting volume 2 ready. I am not planning on honestly releasing the second one until next year because I have so many other things going on this year already. Way too many things. But so far I am on track to continue publishing something every quarter. I may have just gotten it in at the last second at the end of the second quarter, but I did get something published now, and I had something that I published on January 1st. And that was my Arctic Dreams novella, which I think it turned out to be about an hour and a half read based on what Amazon said. But that's also in Kindle Unlimited. If you follow the link that's in the description for the video, you'll be able to find the books. And on that note, I think that I've said everything I'm going to say, so rather than dragging it out, just in the interest of watch time, I'm going to say thank you to all of you for going through this nonsense with me as I figured it all out, so hopefully next time will be a much smoother start. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Drop a like on the video. If you're watching this on the replay, feel free to comment. And I will catch you all in the next one. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other. Drink your water and have a good night.